She saw my kids playing in the dirt and decided to ruin our lives with one phone call. CPS showed up at my door because a Karen wanted revenge. What she didn't realize was that every lie she told was documented, and every accusation came back to haunt her. By the time the case was over, my kids were cleared, and she was standing in court, paying for defamation she could never take back. The day Karen called CPS started like any other quiet afternoon in our neighborhood. The sun was out, the air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and my kids were doing what kids have done for generations, playing in the dirt at the edge of our backyard. They were laughing, digging little trenches with sticks, turning mud into imaginary castles. Their clothes were dirty, their hands were muddy, and they were happier than they'd been all week. That, apparently, was the problem. I was inside making sandwiches when I noticed Karen standing by the fence. She lived 2 houses down and had made it very clear from day one that she disapproved of our existence. Everything from our fence height to the color of our mailbox had been, in her words, concerning. I'd learned to ignore her tight smiles and exaggerated sighs, but that day she wasn't even pretending to be polite. She stared at my kids like she was watching a crime unfold. I stepped outside and asked if she needed something. She didn't answer, just shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight, as if deeply disappointed. Then she pulled out her phone, turned her back to me, and walked away. I didn't think much of it. Karen was always calling someone, the HOA, the city, delivery drivers who parked wrong. I never imagined she'd escalate beyond petty complaints. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, a woman stood on my porch holding a clipboard, her expression calm but serious. She introduced herself as a Child Protective Services investigator. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process the word CPS. My stomach dropped. She explained that a report had been made alleging neglect, that my children were regularly unsupervised, forced to play in unsanitary conditions, and at risk of harm. As she spoke, I felt a mix of disbelief and rage bubbling up in my chest. None of it was true. Not even close. I knew immediately who had made the call. I invited her inside, my hands shaking despite my best effort to stay calm. The kids were at the table eating snacks, laughing about something completely unrelated to the nightmare unfolding around them. The investigator knelt to their level, spoke gently, asked a few questions. She looked around the house, checked the fridge, glanced at the pantry. Everything was normal. Too normal for the accusations she'd been given. Still, procedure was procedure. She had to document everything. She had to ask uncomfortable questions. And every question felt like an insult I didn't deserve. When she left, she assured me that there were no immediate concerns, but the investigation would remain open until paperwork was finalized. Translation: the stress wasn't over. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I started digging. I requested the report. I documented everything: dates, times, photos of the kids playing, school records, pediatrician note. I installed cameras facing the yard. I spoke to neighbors who had seen Karen watching my kids, taking photos, shaking her head dramatically whenever they played outside. Then I made a call of my own to a lawyer. He listened quietly as I explained what happened. When I finished, he paused and said something I didn't expect. "This isn't just harassment," he said. "This could be defamation." Karen hadn't just wasted CPS resources. She'd made knowingly false statements that painted me as an unfit parent. Statements that, if believed, could have destroyed my family. For the first time since that knock on my door, I felt something other than fear. I felt resolve. Karen thought dirt meant neglect. She thought a phone call meant power. She had no idea that she'd just started a chain of events that would cost her far more than she ever imagined. And this time, I wasn't going to let it go. By the end of the week, the CPS visit had already started changing how the neighborhood looked at me. It wasn't overt. No one confronted me directly. Instead, it was the subtle things: the way conversations stopped when I walked past, the way curtains shifted just a little too quickly, the polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Karen hadn't just made a report, she'd planted a seed. And in a neighborhood like ours, gossip spread faster than fact. I knew exactly who was feeding it. Karen stood in her driveway that Saturday morning, coffee mug in hand, casually chatting with two neighbors. As I loaded groceries into my car, I caught her glancing over, her mouth twisting into something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. When one of the neighbors noticed me, Karen leaned in and whispered something. Both of them looked over again. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. I called CPS myself and requested a follow-up, offering additional documentation. The investigator sounded surprised, in a good way. Apparently, parents who had nothing to hide didn't usually volunteer more scrutiny. She scheduled a final visit for the following week. In the meantime, my lawyer moved quickly. He explained how defamation cases worked, especially when false reports involved government agencies. The key wasn't just proving the claims were untrue, it was proving Karen knew they were untrue when she made them. Intent mattered. Malice mattered. And Karen had a long, documented history of targeting us. I handed over everything. Emails she'd sent to the HOA complaining about unsafe children, photos she'd taken from the sidewalk, screenshots of neighborhood app posts where she vaguely warned others about parents who shouldn't have kids. On their own, they looked petty. Together, they painted a clear picture. This wasn't concern. It was obsession. The CPS investigator returned the following Thursday. This time, the visit was almost laughably thorough. She inspected bedrooms, asked the kids about school, checked medical records, and reviewed the footage from our backyard cameras. At one point, she actually laughed, shaking her head as she watched my youngest proudly explain how mud was good for building. Before she left, she closed her folder and looked me straight in the eye. "I'm closing this case as unfounded," she said. "And I'm noting that the report appears to have been made in bad faith." The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. But relief quickly turned into anger. Because while the case was closed, the damage had already been done. For 2 weeks, my family had lived under suspicion. For 2 weeks, my kids had sensed something was wrong without fully understanding why. All because Karen didn't like seeing children play differently than she approved of. That night, my lawyer filed the paperwork. Karen was served the following Monday. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard about it within minutes. Apparently, she'd opened the door expecting another Amazon package, and instead found a process server holding an envelope with her name on it. According to one neighbor, she turned pale and started arguing right there on the porch. By that evening, my phone was blowing up. First came the texts from neighbors asking what was going on. Then came the calls. Some were awkward apologies. Some were cautious questions. A few were outright supportive, admitting they'd always thought Karen went too far but never imagined she'd involve CPS. Karen, meanwhile, went silent. No posts. No complaints. No HOA emails. For nearly a week. Then she snapped. She sent a long, rambling message to the neighborhood group accusing me of retaliation, intimidation, and abusing the legal system. She claimed she'd only been looking out for the children, and that she was now being punished for caring. What she didn't do was deny making false claims. That message became Exhibit A. My lawyer smiled when he read it. "People think deleting things helps," he said. "It doesn't. Oversharing does the opposite." As the case moved forward, Karen's confidence visibly crumbled. She stopped making eye contact. She avoided walking past our house. The woman who once watched my yard like a hawk now crossed the street to avoid being seen. And yet, she still didn't apologize. Instead, she doubled down, refusing mediation, rejecting early settlement offers, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. That decision would cost her dearly. Because the more she fought, the more evidence came out. And the clearer it became that this wasn't about dirt or safety or children at all. It was about control. And Karen was about to learn what happens when you try to destroy someone's reputation and end up putting your own on trial instead. Karen didn't recognize me the morning of the hearing. Or maybe she did, and couldn't stand to look. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, the space between us heavy with everything she'd tried to bury under gossip and righteous outrage. She wore a pale blazer and an expression of wounded disbelief, like the world had somehow turned on her without warning. To anyone who didn't know the full story, she looked like the victim. That was her last illusion. The judge entered. The room stood. And just like that, Karen lost control of the narrative. My lawyer began simply. Date, times, facts. No drama. No emotion. Just a clean, methodical reconstruction of Karen's actions, what she said, when she said it, and what she did afterward. Each piece of evidence clicked into place like a lock snapping shut. Then came the CPS report. The judge leaned forward as the investigators' written findings were entered into the record. Unfounded. No evidence of neglect. No safety concerns. The words sat there, stark and immovable. Karen shifted in her seat. Next came the messages. Screenshots projected onto a screen behind the witness stand. Karen's own words, preserved exactly as she'd typed them. Complaints to the HOA. Warnings to neighbors. The message sent before the CPS call. Maybe the authorities will take this more seriously. That one hit the room like a dropped plate. Karen's attorney tried to object. The judge waved him off. Intent is relevant, she said flatly. When Karen was called to testify, the confidence she once wielded so freely was gone. Her voice wavered. Her answers stretched too long, tangled in explanations that only raised more questions. Did you personally observe any abuse? The judge asked. Well, not abuse exactly, Karen said, glancing at her attorney. But I was concerned. Concerned enough to tell neighbors my children were unsafe? I asked, my lawyer allowing the question. Karen hesitated. I might have shared my worries. Did you tell anyone CPS was investigating us? She swallowed. I may have. The judge's pen paused. Then came the neighbors. One by one, they testified, not with anger but with quiet certainty. They described the rumors, the warnings, the fear Karen had spread with practiced ease. One mother admitted she'd stopped letting her kids play with mine because she was scared of what she'd heard. Karen stared at the table. By the time my turn came, I wasn't nervous. I told the truth. I talked about the knock on the door. The way my kids' laughter had frozen midair. The sleepless nights wondering how close we'd come to losing everything over a lie. I talked about the aftermath. The looks, the whispers, the way a false accusation doesn't vanish just because it's disproven. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge didn't deliberate long. She ruled that Karen's statements were false, knowingly made, and had caused measurable harm. Defamation. Clear. Proven. Repeated. Then she said something that Karen will probably hear for the rest of her life. Calling CPS is not a weapon, the judge said. And using it as one is reprehensible. Damages were awarded. Not symbolic ones. Significant ones. Karen let out a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a sob. Her attorney leaned in to speak to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared forward, frozen, like the room had tilted and she hadn't caught up yet. Outside the courthouse, sunlight felt unreal. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now nodded, smiled, even hugged me. One woman whispered, "Thank you. She did this to my sister years ago." The story didn't end there. Word spread fast. Faster than the rumors ever had. Karen resigned from her HOA position within a week. Then she moved. Not far, but far enough that she was no longer the center of our block. The neighborhood changed after that. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But honestly. My kids went back to playing in the dirt. Parents stayed. Laughter returned. And something else settled in too. A shared understanding that silence only protects the loudest liar in the room. Karen thought power came from fear. She was wrong. It came from truth. And from people finally willing to stand up to someone who thought consequences were for everyone else. By the time the check arrived, thick with zeros and apology letters attached by her lawyer, I realized something important. Winning the case wasn't the real victory. Taking back our name was. And Karen? She learned the hardest lesson of all. Some lies don't just get exposed. They come with a bill. The ruling didn't just end a lawsuit. Cracked something open in the neighborhood. For the first few days after the verdict, things felt oddly quiet, like the calm after a storm when everyone is still afraid to step outside. Cars slowed as they passed our house. Curtains shifted. People watched, processing the fact that the woman who had once controlled the narrative had lost, publicly and decisively. Karen stayed inside. Her house, once the unofficial command center of HOA power, went dark. No clipboard. No dramatic porch conversations. No late-night emails CCing half the street. Just silence. Then the emails started. Not from her, from the HOA board. First came the carefully worded announcement of her temporary leave. A week later, the follow-up, her resignation was accepted. No thank you. No praise. Just a sterile paragraph trying to sound neutral while everyone read between the lines. The board asked if I'd consider attending the next meeting. I almost didn't go. But then I thought about the parents who had whispered apologies. The neighbor who told me she'd been threatened with fines for non-compliance after questioning Karen once. The way fear had quietly shaped our block for years. So I went. The meeting room felt smaller than I remembered. Folding chairs. Fluorescent lights. A long table where Karen used to sit like a judge. Her chair was empty. No one filled it. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't gloat. I just told them what the judge had said, about CPS not being a weapon, about responsibility, about the damage caused when authority goes unchecked. People listened. Really listened. One board member avoided my eyes. Another nodded slowly. Someone in the back wiped their face. When I finished, there was no applause, just a heavy, shared understanding that something had gone very wrong here, and everyone had let it happen. Changes followed. Rules were rewritten. Complaint procedures were documented. Anonymous reports were no longer accepted without evidence. Meetings were recorded. Transparency became more than a buzzword, it became survival. Karen listed her house a month later. The sign went up quietly, without ceremony. I watched movers load boxes into a truck, the same way I'd once watched CPS investigators walk up my driveway, helpless, furious, heart racing. She never looked my way. Not once. The kids noticed before I did how much lighter things felt. They played outside longer. Friends stayed for dinner. Parents lingered on the sidewalk, laughing instead of whispering. The dirt pile Karen once called unsafe conditions became a neighborhood joke. Someone even put a tiny flag in it that said approved play zone. I kept the court documents in a folder at the back of a drawer. Not because I needed to look at them, but because I needed to know they were there. Proof that truth can win, but only if you push it all the way through resistance. The settlement money helped. It paid legal bills, covered missed work, rebuilt the sense of security Karen had shattered. But it didn't erase what happened. False accusations leave fingerprints. They linger in the way you flinch at unexpected knocks. In the way your kids ask, "Are we in trouble?" 4 months afterward. In the realization that systems meant to protect can be twisted by the wrong hand. What stayed with me most wasn't the verdict. It was the realization of how close we came to losing everything because one person decided her opinion mattered more than fact. Karen thought she was protecting the neighborhood. What she was really protecting was her control. And when that control vanished, so did the power she'd built her identity on. I don't know where she went. I don't care. What I know is this: the neighborhood learned a lesson it won't forget. Authority without accountability is dangerous. Silence enables abuse. And standing up, even when it's terrifying, can change the outcome for more than just one family. Karen tried to destroy our reputation with a lie. Instead, she exposed a system that needed sunlight. And once the truth got in, Nothing looked the same again. The courtroom felt smaller than I remembered. Not physically, if anything, the high ceilings and polished oak made it feel cavernous, but emotionally. Every breath sounded louder. Every shuffle of paper echoed like a drumbeat. My kids sat behind me with my sister, their feet barely touching the floor, whispering to each other until the bailiff shot them a look. They went quiet instantly. Karen sat at the opposite table, stiff-backed, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. No smug smirk today. No performative sighs. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. The judge entered, and the room rose. I felt my pulse in my ears as we sat back down. This was it. Months of stress, sleepless nights, attorney fees, and second-guessing myself all came down to what happened next. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked over the file one last time. She didn't rush. She never did. That alone made my stomach knot tighter. She began by summarizing the case in a calm, measured voice. Karen's report to Child Protective Services. The unannounced visit. The investigation. The conclusion that the report was unfounded. Then, the lawsuit, defamation, emotional distress, malicious reporting. When the judge said the phrase, knowingly false statements, I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. She looked directly at Karen. The evidence presented shows that the defendant did not act out of genuine concern for the welfare of the children, the judge said, but rather out of personal animosity toward the plaintiff. Karen's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The defendant admitted, under oath, that she had never observed neglect, the judge continued. That the children appeared healthy, articulate, and well cared for. And that she made the report after a neighborhood disagreement. I swallowed hard. Using CPS as a weapon, the judge said, her voice firm now, is not only reckless, it is dangerous. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. The judge turned a page. On the matter of defamation, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. For a split second, my brain didn't process the words. Then my sister squeezed my arm so hard it hurt. The judge wasn't finished. Damages will be awarded to compensate for legal costs, emotional distress, and reputational harm. Karen let out a sharp breath like she'd been punched. The judge read the number. It was more than I expected. Enough to cover every legal bill. Enough to replace months of lost work. Enough to send a very clear message. Karen shook her head, muttering something under her breath. The judge noticed. Ms., the judge said sharply. This outcome was entirely avoidable. Karen looked up, eyes blazing now. You don't get to endanger children's lives because you're irritated, the judge continued. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. My kids ran ahead, laughing, the tension gone from their shoulders like someone had flipped a switch. Karen stormed past us, not looking in my direction. Her lawyer trailed behind, phone already pressed to his ear. She never apologized. I didn't expect her to. What I did get was peace. In the weeks that followed, the ruling spread fast. Funny how gossip travels when the narrative flipped. Neighbors who'd avoided us suddenly smiled again. A few even stopped by to say they were sorry they'd believed the rumors. CPS sent a formal letter confirming the report was malicious and unfounded. I framed it, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how close we came to losing everything over a lie. The settlement money went first to therapy for the kids, then to a college fund, then to a vacation we'd postponed for years because life kept getting in the way. As for Karen? She moved 3 months later. No goodbye. No farewell post in the neighborhood group. Just a for sale sign and an empty driveway. Sometimes I think about how easily this could have gone differently. If I'd panicked. If I'd stayed quiet. If I'd believed I was powerless. But I didn't. And that's the part one want people to remember. Protect your kids. Document everything. And never let someone convince you that doing the right thing is too much trouble. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't just clear your name. Changes the whole story.